Some betrayals don't arrive with anger or shouting. They come quietly, in the form of who gets celebrated, who gets ignored, and who is made to feel invisible in their own family. I didn't understand that until the night everything finally broke. My name is Lauren. I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now, and the silence around me feels almost unbearable, like it's pressing in on every side. It's been a while since that fateful anniversary dinner, but the events of that night still replay in my mind like a film I cannot escape. That evening was meant to be a celebration, my parents' 45 years of marriage. The venue was an elegant, upscale country club, polished marble floors, glowing chandeliers, and an atmosphere built to project perfection. The room was filled with relatives from near and far, all gathered to witness what was supposed to be the story of a flawless family legacy. My sister Sarah stood exactly where she always did, at the center of attention. Effortlessly composed, beautifully dressed, and praised without even trying. Beside me was my son, Jake. 13 years old, kind-hearted, observant, and far too sensitive for a world that values appearances over feelings. He sat quietly, already looking like he didn't belong in that room. Then my father stepped forward, champagne glass in hand, smiling as if he was about to deliver something meaningful. At first, his speech was everything you would expect: family values, unity, love, togetherness. But then his words shifted. He turned to Sarah and praised her openly, calling her the pride of the family. He celebrated her children as if they were the only grandchildren that mattered. The room erupted in applause, but something inside me went still. I looked at Jake. He wasn't reacting, he wasn't speaking, he was just staring down at his plate, trying to disappear in plain sight. And then he whispered something I will never forget. "What about me, Mom?" That single question shattered everything I was holding together. I stood up. My glass tapped sharply against the table, cutting through the noise. The entire room fell silent, and for the first time in years, I spoke without holding anything back. I thanked my parents, not for love, but for honesty, because what they had always shown in private was now visible in public. Sarah was the favored daughter, and her children were the only grandchildren who seemed to matter. And now, at least, my son didn't have to wonder if he was imagining it. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's face turned red. My mother stared at me with the same cold disappointment I had seen my entire life. Whispers spread through the room. Someone called it inappropriate, someone else called me cruel. But none of it mattered anymore. I looked at Jake. His face said everything he already knew. I had simply confirmed what he had been feeling for years. We left without another word. Outside, the night air felt heavy and cold. The parking lot was empty, almost unreal. We got into the car in silence. I started the engine but didn't drive right away. I just sat there, waiting for something that never came: a call, an apology, anything to suggest we mattered. Nothing did. Halfway home, Jake finally spoke. He asked if Grandpa really meant what he said. I told him I didn't know what was in his heart, but I knew that words reveal more than people realize. When we got home, Jake fell asleep on the couch, still fully dressed. I stayed at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, waiting for something that never arrived. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Sarah. She walked in without waiting, and for the first time, her confidence seemed uncertain. She saw Jake asleep on the couch, and her prepared speech disappeared. She said the night had been awful. For years, she had been the golden child, the one everyone praised without question. But after I left, the family tried to justify everything. My mother called me sensitive, my father called me dramatic. But Sarah said something inside her had finally broken. She had confronted them. She asked if they had even looked at Jake during the speech. My mother dismissed it, said children don't notice these things. Sarah told them they were wrong, that they had been blind for years. And then she admitted something she had never said out loud: she had always known she was favored. She just didn't realize how deep and cruel it had become after my husband Tom died. She had spent years excusing them, calling it distance, calling it awkward grief. Then she turned to me and asked how bad things had really been after Tom died. So I told her the truth. I told her about the early months, how it felt like drowning while trying to raise a child who kept asking when his father was coming home. We had stayed in my parents' guest house for a short time, but even that came with conditions. My mother complained about toys. My father asked when I would get back to normal. There was no space for grief in that house, only expectations. After that, I worked 2 jobs just to survive. I took Jake everywhere because I couldn't afford childcare. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed, deciding which bill could wait and which could not. And every time I thought about asking my parents for help, I remembered the way they looked at me when I needed emotional support the most. Then Sarah asked if I had ever helped them financially. The answer was yes. Over the years, I had quietly paid their bills, covered medications, bought groceries when they hinted they were struggling. They never asked directly, they never had to, and I kept doing it anyway, hoping it would eventually turn into love. As I spoke, Jake stirred awake. I asked him if he wanted breakfast. He nodded softly, and just then, my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Jake. She screamed about humiliation, about disgrace, about how I had ruined everything. Then came the familiar line, "After everything we've done for you." I asked her what exactly she meant by that. She said they had taken me in after Tom died. I looked at Sarah, even she seemed unsettled. I asked my mother if that was really the version of events she wanted to stand by. She said I was twisting things, that I had always been difficult, that I pushed people away. Then she said the final thing that ended the conversation for me. "Maybe if you had been more grateful, things would be different." And that was it. I said, "Then you don't need to worry. Things are already different," and I hung up. I looked at Sarah and said, "I'm done." And for the first time in my life, I meant it without anger, only clarity. Later that day, Sarah returned with a file. It contained the family's financial records, everything my father had kept hidden. What I saw confirmed what I already knew in my gut. Sarah was the primary beneficiary of nearly everything. My name was barely mentioned. And Jake, there was nothing for him at all. Then I found a handwritten note from my mother. "Sarah understands responsibility. Lauren is too emotional. Jake should not be burdened with family assets." That wasn't favoritism. That was a system, a decision made long before I ever noticed. I closed the file and told Sarah I was done being their safety net, financially and emotionally. She then told me something else. They were in serious financial trouble. The image they had protected for years was collapsing under debt. Days passed, in silence. Then Sarah called again. She had finally confronted them and said no. For the first time, they were afraid. A cousin later mentioned they might sell the house. One evening, Jake asked me quietly if Grandma and Grandpa were in trouble. I asked him why. He said something that stayed with me. "People only talk about family when they need something." I told him then that helping someone who hurt you is a choice, not an obligation. Not long after, Jake received a voicemail from my father. He asked him to step up for the family. Jake looked at me and asked if he only mattered when they needed something. I told him no one earns loyalty by causing pain. Love doesn't work that way. Later, Sarah called from their house. We all spoke on speaker. My father tried to explain. My mother cried, and Sarah finally broke. She told them they had lost both daughters the moment they made Jake feel invisible. After that call, something inside me finally settled. Not anger, just peace. Weeks later, a letter arrived from my father. He admitted they had been wrong for years, that they had mistaken my silence for acceptance. He asked to meet. We did. At a small diner. They looked different, older, quieter, stripped of pride. My father said, "We failed you." My mother cried. My father apologized to Jake. I told them I wasn't erasing the past. I was choosing peace, but with boundaries. Nothing would go back to how it was. And I meant every word. Months later, they sold the house. Everything changed after that, and in the quiet that followed, Jake stopped asking if he was enough. Because he finally understood he always had been. And I learned something I will never forget. Sometimes love isn't what you receive, sometimes it's what you finally stop accepting.